Hey everyone, welcome back. This one I'm really excited about. We're going to go through another one of the application cycle videos where I go through the whole process of how to apply to different medical schools around the country. As you know, I'm kind of applying to every single one next year, and so like you, I'm pretty confused by the way that every single medical school does things just slightly differently. And so I'm going to be going through each week, researching one of them, and then sharing what I've found with you guys about the entire process, breaking down every little step, including GPA, GAMSAT, entry requirements, all the different kind of pathways that they use as well. And hopefully this is all helpful for you. So we're going to go through Griffith University in Queensland. I don't know anything about this university, so it was interesting researching it because to be honest, didn't even know what state it was in. I'd heard the name before, but really know very, very little about their program. I'm sure they do it differently to other ones as I keep learning about them. And hopefully this is helpful for you as well. The first thing we're going to do, as always, is we're going to break down the place types, but then we're also going to go through each of the key steps in the process and break down as well all the different pathways that are available to you, all the little nitty-gritty details about GPA. This one's got a lot of little contingencies about different ways to calculate GPA and what is an eligible degree, so we'll break all that down as well. So the first thing is just in terms of place types, I was actually quite surprised. I was going in with this preconceived idea that they didn't have a huge intake. In terms of domestic places, they've got 140 CSP places. Of that 140, 56 of them are said to be BMP places, so the bonded medical places, where you're contracting with the government to then agree to commit the length of your degree in an area where there is a shortage of healthcare professionals, but you can split that up over time. We've talked about that in another video, so I won't go through that in a huge amount of detail. And then on top of that, there's also 35 international places as well. In the 140 CSP places of those domestic ones, 80 of them are actually already reserved for graduates of the Bachelor of Medical Science from Griffith University. And again, this may be a thing of like trying to secure students. Most unis are now doing these kind of guaranteed entry pathways from particular undergraduate degrees. So keep that in mind. There's 140 places. 80 of them are actually already reserved for graduates. So if you're not coming from that degree, then you're effectively then competing for the remaining 60 spots, which suddenly gets a whole lot more competitive. BMP places at Griffith are to be allocated to 28.5% of the entire domestic intake. So the same thing in those 80 guaranteed or reserved places, I should say, 28.5% of them are also going to be BMP as well. So in terms of the general steps, it's kind of the same general steps as any other GEMSAS uni. Like we already went through UniMelb last week. So you're going to see pretty much the same layout, but the details on how things are calculated is going to vary. So if we break down the key kind of 5 steps that we keep seeing, again, we've got complete an eligible key degree and have a GPA that is competitive. The second one is complete the GAMSAT and have a competitive performance there. Third one that is submit an application via GEMSAS. And that's where you can kind of put in which pathway you'll be applying to if you're rural and so on. Then from there, there'll be a 50-50 split or contribution of your GPA and your GAMSAT results that'll be used to rank everybody. They use a percentage score, but it's effectively just a 50-50 rank or combined score of GPA and GAMSAT. That's then used to create interview offers for their interview system. And then there's the interview phase if you're successful. Beyond that, then they rank people based on a combination of their interviews and their GAMSAT and GPA, and then make final firm offers in November. So if we start with step 1, I'll do the pathways at the end of the video because some of that kind of depends on some of the details. So if you're looking at one of the pathways, then hold tight. Some of the details that I'm saying now may not relate, but follow pretty closely because a lot of things still continue through. So with step 1, we're looking at completing an eligible degree, working out what an eligible degree is, and then also how the GPA is calculated for Griffiths. The most common is going to be a bachelor's degree, most likely 3 years, and that can be in any discipline, but it must be, as always, either already completed an application or you must be in your final year during the application year so that you're ready to finish it and then go straight into the Doctor of Medicine. If it's not that though, they also accept standalone honours degrees as well. These need to be completed by the 31st of July in the application year. So if you're applying next year for 2023 intake and you're doing a standalone honours to qualify and use that, it needs to be completed by the 31st of July next year to qualify. Otherwise, if it's finished afterwards, it would have to only be eligible for a 2024 intake and so on. The other one is you could also have an embedded honours degree, so effectively a 3-year undergrad with a 1-year honours on top, so a 4-year total. Those ones, because there's a little bit more of a requirement in it, they are required to be finished by the 31st of December because obviously your project would have started with the calendar year and then you won't have it finished until later in the year. So 31st of December for embedded honours degrees. If you're doing a master's by research, master's by coursework, or a combined research and coursework master's, they're eligible as well. They also need to be completed by the 31st of July in the application year. And you can also do a PhD as well, and that also has to be completed by the 31st of July if it's to be eligible. The other thing is, regardless of which key degree you're actually using from that list, it must be completed within 10 years in terms of how old it can be. It must be within 10 years of the projected commencement date of the degree. The others that I've talked about so far, Sydney and Melbourne, they do it by the 1st of January in the year of entry. Griffiths go by the projected commencement date, which should be pretty early in the year anyway, but it might buy you a couple of extra weeks if you're right on the cusp of the 10-year window or anything like that. If you do have an older degree that is outside that 10-year window though, then you can requalify that degree to be used for your GPA calculation and as a key degree. All you actually need to do is do 1 year's full-time study. You don't even have to complete the degree. So you could effectively just enroll or go into, say, a master's by coursework, for example, if you're eligible, study it for a year full time, and then ditch it. Obviously, yes, that's a sacrifice financially and if there's student debt or anything, but all you need to do is a minimum of 1 year's full-time study so that then you can requalify your old key degree, whether that was a graduate degree or an undergraduate degree. You don't actually use the year's full-time study in your GPA calculation. You could also finish it as well though, just has to be a minimum of 1 year. So that's very kind of unique to Griffiths. I think I haven't seen many other unis really doing that kind of process. So that's a bit more of an affordable and a bit more of an accessible way to requalify an old degree for people like me who are maybe a little bit older. Then in terms of GPA requirements, the minimum requirements are a minimum 5.0 GPA in that key degree. The other thing is they use an unweighted GPA via GAMSAT calculation. So weighted is very popular, but Griffiths actually use the unweighted one. So you still use the scale in terms of what letter grade or result you got from each subject to determine your GPA contribution, but you don't weight it times 2 and times 3 with the second and third years or anything like that. They're all equally weighted. So if you did a little bit better in your first years and a little bit worse in your last years, kind of like me, that actually works in your favor. So if you've done an undergraduate degree, then the way that you determine what years will count is it's going to be the final 3 years of study. If it was a 3-year degree, then it's all 3 years. If it was a 4-year degree, it'd be your second, third, and fourth year. If you're in your final year of a 3-year degree, kind of the same as most other unis as well, then your GPA will be calculated to date. So obviously you'll be applying in kind of May. So whatever your GPA is at that point, that is what will go through to be used to rank you for interview. But then again, if you were to get an offer, it would be conditional on maintaining a particular GPA at that point. So for standalone honours, in terms of how your GPA is calculated, it will be the honours year and then the final 2 years of your previous undergraduate degree to make up the 3 years to calculate the GPA. It's not just the results from the honours year. If you're doing an embedded 4-year degree, then it's going to be the honours year and the last 2 years of your undergraduate. So that is second year, third year, and then the fourth year honours year. In terms of COVID adjustments as well, for undergraduate students or people who were studying in an undergraduate degree during 2020, I don't really know what they're going to do for 2023. We have to wait for the information booklet, or the GEMSAS guide to release. But for 2022 entry, they effectively said that ungraded passes would go unrecognised in the actual calculation of GPA if they occurred in semester 1 of 2020. You could also elect to have your results from semester 1 of 2020 disregarded in the calculation as well. That's an optional thing. This was for 2022 entry. It doesn't say that they're necessarily going to keep that policy for future years for the semester 1 of 2020. But based on what other unis are doing, I would imagine they're going to do the same thing again next year. We'll probably see them say that for anyone using 2020 results, they'll probably keep using that disregarding process. They may make some tweaks and changes to it. But like I said, I'm not on the inside, so I don't really know exactly what they're thinking. Expect that, but expect the worst, that maybe they're going to make it compulsory that it's included next year. Doesn't make sense to me, but we'll see what they do. If you've done a master's by coursework, you'll use your GPA calculated from the full-time component of study from all the subjects. And then if it was, say, a 2 years master's, you need 3 years for an undergrad calculation. So basically the balance, the missing amount of 3 years will be used from your most recent study in your undergraduate or previous key degree. So if you did a 3-year undergraduate and a 2 years master's, the 2 years of the master's by coursework will be used, and then your third year of your undergrad will make up that third year for the GPA calculation. It's all unweighted anyway, so it doesn't matter about anything like that. That's how they'll calculate it. It's the same thing if you're doing a master's by a combination of research and coursework. It's done the same way. They take the full-time study component, and then the remainder is made up by the previous degree's GPA in the most recent years of that. If you're doing a master's by research, then you'll receive a GPA of 7.0 for up to 2 years of master's by research. And then the remaining years to make up the 3 years is taken from the most recent years of your undergraduate degree. So if you did a 2 years master's by research, you get 7 for both of those years. And then your third year would be taken from your final year of your undergraduate degree. And those years would go into calculating your GPA. If you've completed a PhD degree instead, then you'll receive a 7.0 GPA, no questions asked. It's just a flat 7, simple. So then step 2, it's really quite simple with GAMSAT. They don't have much going on. There's not a lot of contingencies or anything. Minimum requirements are a minimum of 50 overall and a minimum of 50 in all 3 sections. Don't know why they say the overall thing, because if you get a minimum of at least 50 in all 3 sections, you're going to get an overall score of over 50. They use the weighted score, or your overall GAMSAT score. That is the one that shows on your statement of results from ACER. They don't use an unweighted one like some unis do. So again, if you're writing a little bit more on section 3, then Griffiths is going to work in your favor for this. These are just minimums though. It doesn't mean that a 50 or a 52 say is competitive. They do have in the booklet that results are really competitive. These are just minimum requirements. Chances are you need a much, much higher score. I haven't actually done my own research on exactly what is considered competitive. Obviously, it's all a balancing act because it's a combination of GPA and GAMSAT. If anyone knows and wants to comment it, then I can pin it at the top. I don't know where Griffiths ranks, to be honest, in terms of competitiveness relative to other unis. Pretty small intake for people not coming through that quoted pathway or anything or any of the special entry schemes. So I'd imagine it's probably pretty high. Then for step 3, so then this is just the actual GEMSAS application, which will run through the course of May. And this is where you'll provide your GPA results, you'll provide your GAMSAT ID number, you'll use your GAMSAT results there to go in. And then you'll also do things like you'll tick the box if you are eligible for the rural pathway, which I'll talk about at the end. You can also tick and identify if you're Indigenous, because there's a First Peoples health pathway as well. And then you also have to preference the location. They've got 2 locations, one Gold Coast, the other one Sunshine Coast. All very nice, happy sounding names. Sometimes I wish that I was in Queensland. You have to preference which location you want to go for, and that also weighs into your offers, because obviously if you're only ticking one box, you have less of a chance than if you tick both. And it's down to who's preferencing what, how competitive those applicants are, and how many places there are available at each of those 2 locations. Step 4 is the interview. So the way that they actually rank people for interview is they do a 50-50 split on GPA and GAMSAT, but they convert them into percentage scores. So if, for example, you got a 70 GAMSAT, that would mean 70%. And if you had, it's annoying that it's out of 7, it's going to test my maths here. If you had, for example, let's say if you had a 6.3, that would be 90% of 7. So you'd put those 2 together and divide it by 2, and then you would get a final percentage score as well, right? So an average of the 2, they don't weight GAMSAT more than GPA, it's 50-50. So if, for example, you had a 6.3 GPA and a 70 GAMSAT, then that would mean you would have 90% contribution from your GPA, and you would have 70% contribution from your GAMSAT. Put those 2 together, you get 160%. Obviously, you have to divide that by 2, and you would have 80% as your average score. And then that would be the percentage score that is used to rank you against other applicants. That's how they're pretty much going to do it. And they start from the top, they work their way down until they've hit their quota for how many people they want to interview, and then offers to interview are made. Griffiths, they just do an MMI, but of course every uni has to do their own silly little names and everything. So they do the Griffith University Multiple Station Admissions Assessment, or GAMSA. So GUMSAA, ridiculous name, as most of these acronyms actually are. What they're looking for is they say that they're assessing desirable qualities in a medical student or a healthcare practitioner. That's obviously quite vague, but we could imagine that it's going to be things like empathy, being conscientious, being culturally sensitive, being professional, communicating well, and being able to, effectively communicate complex ideas or speak with all kinds of different people. That's really the crux of it, right? I've never actually interviewed there, so if someone has and they want to share a bit of insight in the comment section, then feel free. Main thing is they say that it's all scenario based, so that's kind of expected in the multi-mini interview kind of format anyway, but maybe it's a little bit more closer to role playing. Again, I'm no expert here. and there's just multiple stations. Again, I don't even know how many there are. I couldn't find that. So again, if anyone wants to tell me how many stations there are, UniMelb does 8. Other unis do different amounts. Maybe we can find that out. And the other thing that's kind of nice is they hold it on at one single day. So for 2022 intake, they did it on the 22nd of September. So you just get given a day. There's no confusion on it's going to be in a week. You don't have to plan out, what day is it going to be. They just set a date. All their interviews are run on that day. And that's it. And that will hopefully be released in the admissions guide for 2023 intake. Should come out sometime around about application cycles next year. Then finally is offers. So they rank people based on, they only say a combination of the 50-50 split score that you got from GPA and GAMSAT, and then your interview score, which is also a percentage, but they don't say what the weighting is. We can maybe assume it's a 50-50 split, meaning that GPA actually only counts for 25%, GAMSAT counts for 25%, and interview for 50%. Kind of like how UniMelb does it, but they technically don't say what the weighting is or if there is a weighting. So it may be 33-66 or it could be some other combination, we don't know, but they do still consider your test results and your uni results along with your interview performance at the same time. They're going to rank everyone and give people offers based on their scores in descending order, create a pecking order, give the offers to the top people and work their way down. But keep in mind, they do have some priority access schemes for first peoples and also for rural applicants as well. So this can actually shuffle the order. And then as a final thing in terms of entry requirements, if you're watching this and you're an international applicant looking for one of those up to 35 places, there's obviously the English proficiency component as well, which I think I forgot to do in some of my other videos. So if I did, I apologize, but check the GEMSAS guides and they should have the English proficiency requirements in that as well to check through. But Griffiths, they have a very long list. So I'm probably just going to be reading off a screen because I cannot memorize all this stuff and it's ridiculous. So if you are an international applicant, the first thing is if you've sat the Ielts, you can use your Ielts score. You need to have a minimum overall score band of 7.0 or higher, and you need to also maintain a 7.0 minimum in each of the sections. Alternatively, you can also receive a minimum of a B score on the Occupational English Test, or the OET, in all 4 sections. So you need to keep a B or higher in all 4 sections. Alternative to that, you could also do the internet-based TOEFL score of 94. That would be the minimum. But you also need to have a minimum of 24 for the listening and reading, 27 for the writing component, and 23 for the speaking component. So very, very particular. Alternatively to that, the fourth option is you could also have a minimum overall score of 65 in the Pearson Test of English. And then you're not allowed to have any individual score below 65. So a 65 overall or above, and each of the section scores have to be 65 or above. An alternative to that, a fifth option, is if you haven't got a score from one of those tests, you could also have completed successfully 2 years of secondary and your entire tertiary studies solely taught in English in a recognised country. A recognised country for Griffith is listed as either Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa, UK, or the USA. The alternative to that, a sixth one, believe it or not, is you could also have successful completion of at least 2 of the last 5 years of tertiary study, if you've been at uni for quite a while, at least 2 of the last 5, to have been entirely taught and assessed in English in one of those recognised countries. Any of those 6 all qualify to meet the minimum English proficiency requirements. Okay, that was a lot. Let's see. Cool. And so then finally, once we've got all of that about the different pathways into the Doctor of Medicine program at Griffiths. So the first one is obviously the standard pathway via GEMSAS. This is going to be for the non-rural people. Rural people use the same thing, but you'll tick a box. And there, the basic concepts of it are GPA, GAMSAT, and then your interview. You also, in the process, you have to still preference your location. And then if you're an international applicant, you actually only have access to the Gold Coast campus. I don't know why, but the Sunshine Coast is not open to international applicants. The second pathway is the facilitated pathway through the Bachelor of Medical Science at Griffiths, where there's 80 subquoted places. Effectively, that's like a streamlined process. They don't really say much about whether or not you're still applying through GEMSAS. I would imagine that you are. They didn't say anything about direct application. But again, it would probably just be a case of in your application, tick the box to say that you've completed that specific degree. They can probably confirm it. And then you're put in a separate ranked list for those 80 places. The other one then is the Rural Priority Access Scheme. So with this one, very similar to Unimel, basically to qualify as rural, you'll tick a box in your application through GEMSAS, but you'll need to prove that you're actually a rural applicant. So you need to prove that you've lived in one of those rural areas that are designated nationally. You have to have lived either in RA2 to RA5 regions, and it has to be either for 5 years consecutively or 10 years cumulatively if you've kind of been in and out of a rural setting. And then the other thing is as well that there is a benefit to being able to apply through rural access, because that gives you, as they say, priority access to the places. So they're making sure that they've got a certain number of people that are rural applicants getting into the course. So it probably increases your likelihood of getting in with a particular score. Then they've also got the First People's Health Priority Access pathway as well. And so with this one, you still need a minimum GPA of 5.0. And if you are a Griffiths graduate as well of a health-related degree, which they won't list which those are, but I'd imagine you probably know if you're one of those graduates, then you don't require the GAMSAT in that case. They don't require a GAMSAT score. If you're applying through the First People's pathway, but you have not completed a Griffiths health-related course, then you still need to sit the GAMSAT, and then you still need to meet the minimum 50s in all 3 sections and minimum overall 50. On top of that, for everyone applying through the First People's pathway, you would still apply through GEMSAS. It's not a direct application. You still go through the GEMSAS pathway, but there'll be an option to identify as an Indigenous applicant, and there might be some documentation as proof of that so that no one's exploiting the system or anything. And then we also have, instead of, if you're to be successful to get an interview, you don't actually sit the standard GUMSAA. They have a First People's interview process itself. Again, they don't actually specify what the differences are, but it should still be assessing the same qualities. And then finally, they've also got another pathway, but we don't really have to worry too much about it right now, which is the MD/PhD pathway. So if you were to be successful in gaining entry into the Griffiths course, then MD2 students can actually then in that second year apply to the uni to then begin a PhD program as well and start working on a research project. I don't know much about that. I guess you guys probably don't care all that much either, because we're just focused on trying to get in somewhere, but that's also an option in the course as well. It's optional. You don't have to actually do it. You can just run through and do the MD. Most MDs have some kind of smaller 6-month research project anyway. This would be a full PhD qualification. Cool. And that's everything. So hopefully that's broken down the entire process of the Griffiths pathways. They've got a much more streamlined approach, to be honest, of how you actually go through the step-by-step process. Kind of like Unimel, they have lots of different ways to apply, or different like sub-quotas and that kind of thing. And probably most of the complication comes from the way that GPA is assessed. But other than that, they have a really simple process of just GEMSAS application, GPA, GAMSAT, interview, offer. Simple as that. So hopefully this has all been really helpful. And if you're looking to apply to Griffiths, let me know in the comments. I've had a few requests to do some other unis, and I'm working on requests at the moment. Obviously, I'm going on break, so there may not be a video for the next couple of weeks. But next up, I believe I have Monash people have requested, which is a very, very interesting one. They do things very, very differently. And another one that I'd be looking at doing as well very soon is Flinders, because Flinders is another alternative, and it interests me at the same time because I don't know much about it, but a few of my students have mentioned that they're applying there, and from what I've heard, it sounds like a pretty interesting process that opens up lots of opportunities, because I know very little about portfolio unis, so that will be another one on the list as well. If you have requested one, I am going to be working on it, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm covering lots of different states to get as many people and their possible schools covered early, and then we'll keep filling in the blanks, so to speak, where we might have to double back and go back to, say, New South Wales or South Australia, where there's lots of different options. Cool. All right. Anyway, I'll leave that there because I've rambled on way too long, and I will see you guys in the next video.